Hello YouTube. Vladimir Sherbakov, who passed away in 2004, was a Soviet and Russian writer and journalist who became an Atlantologist in the late 1980s. That is, a scholar who researched the Atlantis. He supported the idea of the island homeland of Atlantis being in the Atlantic Ocean, with a second Atlantis founded by immigrants or migrants in the Eastern Mediterranean. I translated one of his published research works for Zechariah Sitchin some years ago, of course. It was about the city of Asgard. If you have not read Sitchin's The 12th Planet book, my advice is that you do so. As for Sherbakov, for years, a great attention to the question of Atlantis was paid by the scientist and writer, one of the eminent Russian Atlantologists, whose name was Vladimir Sherbakov. And he, Sherbakov, believed that there existed two Atlantis in different geographical locations. The first one, in fact, the Atlantis of Plato, was located in the Atlantic Ocean, and the second one, Eastern Atlantis, including in itself the most ancient cities of Asia Minor and the Mediterranean. The scientists affirmed that the Eastern Atlantis was founded by migrants from the metropolis, again Atlantis of Plato, before the world catastrophe. Sherbakov looked at many sources. He, like Sitchin, was fascinated with ancient history, especially the hidden history. Did ancient civilizations possess knowledge that has since been lost to science? Were amazing technologies available to the ancient Egyptians that enabled them to construct the pyramids? Technologies that have somehow been forgotten. How the great pyramids of Egypt were built has been the subject of debate for millennia. The fact is, no one really knows for certain exactly how they were constructed, how they were built. The modern estimates of mainstream science contend that it took a workforce of about 5,000 men, and it took 20 years to build the Great Pyramid using ropes, pulleys, ramps, ingenuity, and basically brute force. Well, one of the sources Sherbakov used, a most interesting source, was the 10th century Arab historian Ali Abdul Hassan Ali Al-Masudi, known as the Herodotus of the Arabs. Al-Masudi had traveled much of the known world in his day before settling in Egypt, and he had written a multi-volume history of the world. His historical encyclopedia was titled, in English, Meadows of Gold and Mines of Gems. Masudi is credited with up to 46 works on Muslim creeds and sects, natural history, also including universal history and other subjects. Al-Masudi too was struck by the magnificence of the Egyptian pyramids. Let us look at what Sherbakov found out, and I will add my comments later too. It is interesting to follow the assessment of the cultural heritage of ancient Egypt in connection with the problem of Atlantis. In Arabic sources, regardless of the Egyptian priests who indicated that the Atlanteans owned the Mediterranean and possibly part of Egypt, they, the Arabs, speak of the pyramids of the pharaohs as if they were built in memory of the flood that destroyed civilization, and at the same time in case of a future possible flood. Let us follow these testimonies. The Arab Herodotus is what they call the founder and the largest authority of Arab historiography. Al-Masudi. Al-Masudi described the pyramids in detail. Surid, the son of Shaluk, the son of Sermun, the son, etc., one of the Egyptian rulers before the flood, built two large pyramids. It is not known why they were they later received the name from a man named Shaddad, the son of Ad, because they were not built by members of the family of Ad, because they could not conquer Egypt, because they did not have the power that the Egyptians had, who possessed magic spells. The reason for the construction of the pyramids was a dream that Surid saw 300 years before the flood. He dreamed that the earth was flooded with water, and helpless people were floundering in it and drowning, that the stars had left their paths in confusion and were falling from the sky with a terrible noise. And although this dream made a strong impression on the ruler, he did not tell anyone about it, but in anticipation of terrible events, he called the clergy from all over his country and secretly told them about what he had seen. They predicted to him that a great calamity would befall his state, but after many years the land would again produce bread and dates. Then the ruler decided to build pyramids and ordered the prophecy of the priests to be inscribed on pillars and large stone slabs. In the inner rooms of the pyramids, he hid the treasures and other valuable things along with the bodies of his predecessors. He ordered the clergy to leave in their written testimonies about his wisdom, about the achievements of the sciences and arts. After that, he ordered to build underground passages to the very waters of the Nile. He filled all the rooms inside the pyramids with talismans, idols, and other miraculous objects, as well as records made by the priests and containing all areas of knowledge, names, and properties of medicinal plants, information concerning counting and measurements, so that they would be preserved for the benefit of those who understand them. Further, Al-Masudi gives a description of the 3 pyramids of the Nile, that is, the pyramids at Giza. In front of the first pyramid, apparently the pyramid of Khufu, there is a hole with columns built of stone slabs connected with lead. In another nearby, probably the pyramid of Hafra, there are 30 rooms for sacred symbols and talismans made of sapphire, for weapons made of stainless metal, and objects made of flexible, unbreakable glass. In the third pyramid, colored, that is the pyramid of Menkaure, since its lower part was lined with slabs of pink granite. The bodies of dead priests rested in sarcophagi made of black granite, and next to each lay a book in which the sacraments of his profession and his deeds during his lifetime were recorded. The ruler had appointed one guardian to each pyramid. The guardian of the eastern pyramid was a statue carved out of granite with a weapon resembling a spear. A serpent was hidden on his forehead, ready to pounce on anyone who approached, wrap around his neck, strangle him, and then return to his refuge. The guardian of the western pyramid was made of black and white onyx. He sat on a throne, armed with a spear, and threw sparks from his eyes. As soon as someone appeared at the entrance, a dull sound was immediately heard, and the alien died. In the pyramid, he identified a statue on a pedestal as a guard, which had such power that it could knock down and kill any person. Upon completion of the construction, the ruler gave the pyramids to the spirits and ordered that the sacrifices be offered to them. In this way, he prevented the appearance of outsiders inside the pyramid, except for those who, according to their rank, were worthy of receiving permission to do so. The spirit of the first pyramid was seen in the guise of a beardless young man with long teeth and yellowed skin. The spirit of the western pyramid is a naked woman who lures people and sends a disease on them. She can be seen exactly at noon and at sunset. The spirit of the colored pyramid is an old man who wanders around it, waving a fire in a vessel, like a censor from Christian temple. That is how he was seen. Al-Masudi reports that after the construction, Surid inscribed the following words on the pyramids. I, the ruler of the Surids, built these pyramids in 60 years. Let the one who comes after me try to destroy them within 600 years. But it is easier to destroy than to build. I dress them in silks. Let him try to dress them with matting. The historian Al-Kaisi recorded the history of a contemporary who entered the Great Pyramid shortly after it was opened in the first half of the 9th century. He found a square room with a vaulted ceiling, and behind it a corridor 10 cubits deep and wide enough for a person to walk through it. In each corner there were doors that led to a spacious room where the bodies of the deceased lay, and each deceased was wrapped in many layers of cloth, already blackened with age. However, the bodies of all the deceased remained in complete safety. They had hair on their heads, and not a single gray one, and therefore there was an impression that they were the corpses of young people. The corpses were lying so close together that it was impossible to separate them, and when he tried to lift them, they turned out to be light as air. He also said that there were 4 circular shafts full of human corpses, and that the whole place was polluted with bats. He also noticed that various animals were also buried there, and he also said that he found a piece of cloth about the length of an elbow, a snow-white cotton cloth embroidered with silk, was rolled up in the form of a turban, and when he opened it, there was a dead seagull, which has not lost a feather, as if it had just expired. From the above-mentioned room with a vaulted ceiling, one could get to the topmost chamber of the pyramid. There was a corridor 5 steps wide, but without steps. This corridor, in the time of Al-Mamun, could reach a narrow passage where the mentioned tomb was found. There is indeed a square room with a vaulted ceiling in the Great Pyramid. This is the so-called empty chamber, mistakenly called the tomb of the Queen. However, there are no corner doors in it, but there are entrances to 2 shafts. From there, it was impossible to get to the topmost chamber. It was possible to get to the topmost chamber of the pyramid, that is, to the tomb of Khufu. Abd al-Latif, in the narrative of Egypt, wrote this: the pyramids are built of huge stones from 10 to 20 cubits long, from 2 to 3 cubits high, and the same width. But especially admirable is the amazing care with which these stones are cut and laid. The plates are so well fitted that you cannot put a needle or a hair anywhere between them. They are connected by a mortar layer no thicker than a sheet of paper. I do not know what kind of solution it is. Its composition is completely unknown to me. The stones are covered with ancient writings that no one can read anymore. I have not met anyone in all of Egypt who would say that he knows how to read this writing or knows such a person. There are a great many inscriptions here, and if someone had a desire to copy only those that are visible on the surface of these 2 largest pyramids, he would fill more than 10,000 pages with them. Finally, already in the 14th century, on the eve of a wide acquaintance with the pyramids and stories about them in medieval Europe, Ibn Khaldun, another Arab author, wrote this: know that all the creations of ancient peoples arose solely due to the craft skill and coordinated work of many workers. This is the only way these monuments and buildings could be built, and therefore we cannot assume, like the uninitiated, that the whole point is that our ancestors are stronger than us. Human beings do not differ from each other in this respect to the same extent as their monuments and buildings. The storytellers took advantage of this plot and used it to fill their stories with exaggerations. They did not understand that it was only thanks to the highest social organization and craft skill that these gigantic monuments were built, and therefore attributed their creation to the strength and abilities that, in their opinion, the people of antiquity drew from the power of their bodies. But this is not so. Well, it seems that the Arab authors saw the pyramids in their own way, not as Europeans later saw them, and not as ancient authors saw them. Where did, for example, Al-Masudi's testimony about stainless metal and flexible glass, that is plastic, where did it come from? One can only guess. After all, plastic became known centuries after Al-Masudi lived. It turns out that there was a civilization before the pyramids, maybe the same Atlantean civilization that Plato talked about, and in times not so distant, we find evidence in favor of the existence of Atlantis once, which left the art of building cities and surrounding them with channels, rings, to the men of the future, as the Atlanteans did. In the second book of history, Herodotus opens the veil over this true scale of events in time. Egyptian priests spoke of 345 statues in Thebes, 345 generations of high priests. This figure points to the antiquity of the history of Egypt. Herodotus writes that Osiris appeared 15,000 years before Amasis, who ruled in 570 to 527 BC. The statement of the priests that they have been counting time, along with important records in all areas, for at least 10,000 years can cause confusion, but there were more than 500,000 manuscripts in Alexandria's library. This fact indirectly confirms the antiquity of the Egyptian chronicles. The figure is too impressive. However, no one has yet managed to find a single book dedicated to Atlantis. Maybe it will happen in the near future. Then the question of the formation of the Egyptian culture will become clear. More recently, the time was counted in many countries from 5508 BC. Recent finds of archaeologists who discovered the oldest mines on the planet right there in the land of Egypt push this border back almost from the time immemorial. In any case, many thousands of years before the supposed demise of Atlantis, people had built structures for the extraction of mineral formations, in particular flint. The ruins of prehistoric mines were found at the bottom of the Mediterranean Sea, near Marseille. The Arab scholar Ibn Battuta in the 14th century wrote this: "The pyramids were erected by Hermes to preserve works of arts and science and other achievements during the flood." The 9th century historian Ibn Abd Hokm left a record relating to the history of the construction of the pyramids. Most agree that the first pyramids were built by Sorid ibn Soluk, the pharaoh of Egypt, who ruled 300 years before the flood. The reason was that he saw what he saw in a dream. It is like the whole earth has turned over. People were lying face down, and the stars fell and hit each other with a terrible roar. When he awoke in terror, he gathered the high priests of all provinces of Egypt, a total of 130 people, led by Aklimon, and he told them everything. They measured the height of the stars, and having made calculations, predicted a catastrophe. Sorit, or Zurit, Zared, built 30 treasuries, placing them in a pyramid. He filled them with gold, jewelry, gems, vessels and ceramics, stainless steel weapons, and, according to an ancient author, unbreakable glass that can be bent. It is clear from this text that the author should have known about their existence 1,000 years before the invention of stainless steel and plastics. From whom did he learn about this? From whom did the creators of the first pre-flood or pre-deluge pyramids learn these secrets? The Atlanteologists respond without hesitation: from the Atlanteans. Sherbakov continued, events on our planet are connected with the movement of luminaries, celestial bodies. This was known by the ancient sages, whom we call the Egyptian priests. Modern people are beginning to understand this, even though for science as a whole and for most scientists it remains a secret behind 7 seals. It is not surprising. Even in the last century, science denied meteorites. The very fact of stones falling to the earth from the sky was ridiculed. In ancient Egypt, no one would probably have believed that it would take several thousand years for humanity to come to the obvious truth again, because there, on the banks of the Nile, they not only knew about asteroids and meteorites, but special hieroglyphs were invented to indicate them in writing. The priests were right when they said that the celestial bodies, primarily asteroids, deviate from their heavenly path, and then all life on earth is destroyed by fire. This heavenly fire, according to them, destroyed Atlantis as well. I, Sherbakov, named the celestial body that caused the catastrophe and the flood 12,000 years ago the Sais asteroid. The city of Sais was the center of ancient wisdom and knowledge. I was lucky enough to find evidence. The age of the soil in which the carcasses and bones of mammoths are buried in the largest Yakut cemetery is the same, 12,000 years. There are much older layers under it. Moreover, the upper young soil is nothing but volcanic ash. How did it get here if there are no volcanoes nearby? From afar, more precisely from the Atlantic, for even at the bottom of the lakes of Ireland, there is still mud of the same age. 12,000 years old. It was in the Atlantic Ocean that the Sais asteroid fell, breaking through the thin oceanic crust, literally squeezing out a fountain of magma from the depths, which mixed with water and burst, sprayed. Then, at about this latitude, hurricane-force winds of the troposphere and stratospheres carried giant dark clouds to the east, almost to the Pacific Ocean. There were unprecedented mud showers that overflowed the rivers. Waves of mudslides, tens of meters high, swept through the valleys. Mammoths drowned. Other herbivores and predators that pursued them died along with them. In the observation of stars and luminaries, celestial bodies, the ancients possessed secrets unknown to us. They probably knew the life of the ocean better than we did. It cannot but cause amazement that 3 days before the disaster that destroyed the island of Santorini in the Mediterranean Sea, the evacuation began, and people managed to take their jewelry with them. This was much later than Atlantis, in the 2nd millennium BC. It is impossible to imagine such a thing these days. This is evidenced by the tragic events in Mexico, Armenia, Central Asia, and other regions of the world. Well, here Sherbakov referred to the earthquakes of the 20th century. Besides Sherbakov, I have read about the Arab Herodotus in other sources. Abul Hassan Al-Masudi, the Arab historian from the 10th century AD, wrote about ancient Egypt and the methods he alleges they used to move massive stones, including those used to build the pyramids. Among other subjects, he studied the ancient science of philosophy, astronomy, geography, medicine, and music. He also traveled extensively. His first recorded journey I believe it was in the years 915, 916, took him to Khuzestan, Fars, Kerman, Segistan, and parts of Khorasan. From there he crossed the Indus Valley to the Punjab and Sindh, the northeastern and southern provinces on what is today Pakistan. And he traveled down the western coast of India. Later voyages took him to Oman, Yemen, the eastern Mediterranean coast, northern Syria and northern Iraq. Al-Masudi travels actually occupied most of his life, from at least 903 to 915 BC to the near the end of his life. His journeys took him to the most of the Persian provinces, Armenia, Georgia, and other regions of the Caspian Sea, as well as to Arabia, Egypt. He also traveled to the Indus Valley, as I said, and other parts of India, which is very important, especially the western coast. And he voyaged more than once to East Africa. After exploring the Caspian Sea region and the Caucasus, he settled in Egypt. He claimed that a magic papyrus imprinted with symbols was placed under each stone when they were building pyramids, after which a metal rod was struck against the stone to initiate the levitation process. The stone would travel along the path, wrote Al-Masudi, for a distance of about 50 meters and then settle to the ground. The process would then be repeated until the builders had the stone where they wanted it. Again, according to Al-Masudi, the stone would be guided along a fenced path with metal poles placed on each side. Some believe these poles could have been used to create high-frequency sound vibrations, which would have been responsible for creating the levitation effects. Considering that the pyramids were already thousands of years old when Al-Masudi wrote this explanation, we must wonder where he got his information. But he was not alone. The Mamluk era Sunni Arab historian Taqi al-Din al-Maghrizi wrote the following: they had leaves of paper with writings on it, and after a stone had been broken and worked in the quarry, they put those papers on the block and could then move the stone with a single push over a distance of 100 sam. It's about 300 meters. They repeated this until the stone was on the pyramid. In the 15th century, this historian Al-Maghrizi reported that the king decorated the walls and ceilings of his pyramid chambers with representations of stars and planets and all the sciences, and placed treasures within, such as iron weapons that did not rust and glass that bent without breaking. Okay? I also read that it was, however, Arab stories and legends that became most fantastic after the conquest of Egypt in the 7th century AD. One popular Arab legend maintained that the Great Pyramid was the tomb of Hermes, the Greek counterpart of the Egyptian Thoth, who, like Surid, built pyramids to hide literature and science from the uninitiated and preserved them through the flood. The Yemeni Arabs believe that the two large pyramids to be the tombs of their ancient kings, one of whom defeated the Egyptians. This is perhaps a distant memory of the Hyksos invasion in the 2nd millennium. I recall also reading in an Egyptian magazine in English once the following: as the Coptic Christians came into domination in Egypt, details of the pyramids became much wilder. One legend stated that then Surid ordered the building of the pyramids, had the sciences recorded in them, had the treasures and pieces of sculpture put into them. Finally, he set an idol to guard each of the 3 pyramids at Giza. After his death, Surid was buried in the eastern Khufu's pyramid, his brother Hujib in the western, or Hafiz one, and Hujib's son Karuras in the or Menkauri's pyramid. This tells us that the king Surit had a dream in which the flat earth turned over and the stars began to fall on it. This so frightened him that, fearing that the end of the world was near, he decided to erect the pyramids and to enclose within them all the knowledge of his age. King Surit is largely legendary, though his name may be a corruption of Sufis, a late form of Hufu. He is said to have lived some 3 centuries before the biblical flood. His tale is a blend of Judeo-Christian themes. It's from the same magazine. Surit lived at Amsus, which is probably a corruption of Memphis, and was lord of the boat, which is an amalgam of Noah's Ark and the bark of the sun god. A bark is a type of sailing vessel. So, Sherbakov was onto something, and he continued his research of Atlantis and its outposts. In the future videos, I'll come back to the Russian scientists and their quest to find the Atlantis. I have already made several other videos on the subject, and you will find them in my playlist for this channel. I am very interested in the sunken ruins of an ancient city that was sighted under the waters near the Russian Kuril island of Rashua. Please see my video about it in the above playlist. I believe it expands the boundaries of the Eastern Atlantis. And there will be more about the era that dates back to 12,000 years to 11,000 years 500 BC in my future videos. It's a very interesting period. And I have some very unusual, let's say, information that I want to share too. Again, it's all from open sources. So. Also, I want to bring some other ancient civilizations that I have been interested in because of Ivan Yefremov that I read in my youth and my travels. I will tell you more. But the 12th century era proverb said, "Man fears time, but time fears the pyramids." And this was very interesting, and I hope I gave you an overview of a very dedicated Russian researcher. Remember, we also have to look at ancient India, ancient Crete, and what Soviet and Russian authors discovered in ancient writings. Please, if you can, support my research. You will find links in the description to this video. Please subscribe to my channel and tell others. Thank you.